Hello, everybody, and welcome to Dr. Deep State. Today, I want to talk about politics. I specifically want to go through chapter 4 of the Jewish Utopia. The chapter is titled Peace and Abundance. Um, but first, I want to kind of give you a slight outline of what I'm doing. I'm going to compare the politics of today and the future and kind of go back in time to explain what's going on today and sort of get a sort of juxtaposition of two visions of the future. I also want to reflect a little bit about how I'm going to approach this. I believe what I'm reading here in 1932 by Michael Higger is the sort of exoteric view of Judaism. And before I go on, I do think I need to just slightly have us bear in mind that there is also an esoteric view to this. And let me just do this now. I'm going to primarily be just using the exoteric text, reading it at face value, and doing some evaluation. The esoteric view, I devoted 25 pages to this in Seeing Through the Singularity. So I'm going to try to give you just a snippet. The exoteric view is largely what are on the pages of the Torah or the Old Testament of the Christian Bible. The esoteric view, I don't want to have this violently brief, but we have the Torah, we have the Talmud, and the Kabbalah is sort of the wine pressed from the Talmud. And it, in my mind, is essentially a perfect inversion of the creator God of the Old Testament. In the esoteric world, God is not knowable. He was sort of shattered apart in a sort of Big Bang-like explosion. The sparks are about. And the Jewish people are a god unto themselves, but more specifically, critical Kabbalistic rabbis and a power elite are a god in the making, and a god. They're ushering in the sort of ultimate Messianic Age, but they understand themselves to be a god in the sense that they're responsible for picking up the sparks and creating the sort of singularity that will bring us into the new age. So that's just a little bit about something I want to bear in mind. So in the vision, we're going to be talking about it sort of God that brings, Jerusalem. It makes, Israel the nation state that it became, and Jerusalem the center of activity. It's God bringing it about. In the esoteric or the Kabbalistic vision, it's sort of these critical players who have assumed that role that bring this world about. So again, I just want to kind of make that point before I begin. So the politics of today and the politics of the future are very similar. And I'll call this Communitarianism, and I'll cite some of its sources. But let's get on with the exoteric definition of Communitarianism. It's a theory or system of social organization based on small, self-governing communities, an ideology that emphasizes responsibility of the individual to the community and to the social importance of the family unit. So it kind of sounds like, when we think of this dichotomy that was always, all these isms that were placed in front of us in the 20th century, it's kind of supposed to be the best of both worlds. We have the individual and we have the collective, and sort of this idea of responsibility of the individual, pulling all, together all these seemingly separate parts between the atomized individual and the collective. So let's do a little bit more of the exoteric. It was introduced in the 1990s by Etzioni, an Italian, promotes community responsibility over individual rights, concerns for the common good, recognizes individual human dignity as well as social dimensions of human existence. Beliefs are that society provides its citizens with equal opportunity, material well-being, opportunity for individual self-fulfillment, principles of fairness, and all this kind of really nice sounding stuff. So I want to get a little bit more into the esoteric dimensions of this, and I'm going to take some of this information from chapter 2 of Seeing Through the Singularity. You may recall, I'm sure you've heard the famous 1991 address from George H.W. Bush when he's talking about this big idea, the New World Order. And he's talking about specifically, he says, we can find meaning and reward by serving some purpose higher than ourselves, a shining purpose, the illumination of 1,000 points of light. And so that very similar idea is embedded in Etzioni's idea of serving a purpose higher than yourself, the 1,000 points of lights. It's a little Kabbalah speak for bringing the shattered sparks back together into singularity and into a new world order. So let's get into a little bit of this. This is from my own work. Hopefully it'll be published within the next few months. So right now I'm going to draw heavily on the work of Nikki Rapana. And before I began, this was about 6 years ago, I struck up a friendship with hers, and she's a great person, and her works are very illuminating, and I'll try to include a couple of those. And she had been into the New World Order quite a few years before I was, and I was so impressed by some of her ideas and her talents as a researcher. And we had a number of great conversations and even spoke of someday doing research together. It never happened, but I really enjoyed our conversations and our time that we spent together. According to Nikki Rapana, co-founder of the Anti-Communitarian League, the leader of the unheralded transition to a communitarian system in the U.S. is the Israeli Zionist founder of the Communitarian Network, Dr. Etzioni, born Werner Falk. And I believe his new name, it kind of means tree of life. So you're going to get where I'm going. There's a Kabbalistic element into just about everything that he does. He is a former member of the Council on Foreign Relations, the founder of American Communitarianism, the founder and director of the Communitarian Network, and possibly the most influential man in American politics today. So according to Etzioni, nationalism must be ended. It is a creed that has come to burden the expansion of globalism. The communitarian agenda is to eliminate all nations and establish an all-powerful central global government. Etzioni's new communitarian egregore, that's my idea, it's a thought form that's being created, and I can't get into that right now, is an invocation of community spirit, hearkening back to Bush's 1991 idea of we're all in it together, based on the Talmud, Hegel, and the theosophical ideas espoused by Madame Blavatsky and Aleister Crowley. Communitarian legal theory is based on the Talmud and the Kabbalah. And that was 6 years ago when I found that I had this idea in my head. And when I found it in print, that Nikki had identified the Talmud as the direction of and the transitions, because it just squared with what the changes I was seeing going on with common law and constitutional law in the United States, that when I read that she had hit on something. And I don't know if she was the first, but I'd never seen it anywhere before. And I've rarely ever seen it since, except maybe in the last 8 to 10 months. So that's the kind of researcher she is. So let me continue. Kabbalah and other New Age instructors now openly advocate the invocation of an ultimate light being. Said another way, 1,000 points of light, back to Bush, is a global invocation based upon quote unquote community orientated principles. The project employs biopolitics, that's me, control over bodies, minds, and spirits in order to direct mankind's universal aspiration into one light, i.e., the singularity. According to Nikki Rapana, the theory of communitarianism has its own law, its own guru, its own theoretical basis, and another set of laws based upon the Talmud. These theories and practices are being taught to American lawyers and judges at the Judaic Law Institute in Washington, D.C. Communitarian and Talmudic law are to supersede all other national and religious laws. Meanwhile, Israel has developed a system of courts for non-Jews adhering to the 7 laws of Noah, the Noahide laws corresponding with the Talmud and the Sephirot or path of initiation taught in the Kabbalah. And Nikki notes that the 7 Noahide commandments are arranged in the Sephirot structure familiar to students of Kabbalah. The Sephirot is structured, the Sephirot structure is called the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, which attempts, this is me now, to unify the cosmos. I'll drop it there, but I think I've mentioned before, of course, one of the more remarkable pieces of this Talmudic law, and again, bear in mind what's being directed toward Jerusalem right now is the attempt to transition both the United Nations and the International Criminal Court there. And this would be a Talmudic world order that sounds very fantastic. I understand that. And of course, of note on there, there'll be a purification process. Particularly, Christians should be aware of this. They would consider a Christian who identifies John 1:1, that Jesus is logo, the Son of God. That would be considered idolatry, and the sentence for that would be beheading. So, crazy stuff. Okay, let's start with chapter 4, Peace and Abundance, from the first page of chapter 4. In the program of the Jewish prophets for an ideal life in this world, and this is the central theme of what I'm driving at, it's this world. Next to righteousness and justice, which we spoke about last time, and the people that would need to be removed in that process, comes universal peace. So the politics that we're speaking about today is really a politics of peace and abundance in this new utopia. And you can see the idea of the prophets speaking there, talking about this new age where it would be about peace and abundance. And we could see the working toward that world in the 20th century with the League of Nations. And that would have still been present during the writing of this in 1932. It was still a few years off the birth of the nation state of modern Israel. So the League of Nations is, of course, the prototype for the United Nations, which is, I think, the prototype of where it's intended to go next. Higgins continues. According to the Talmud, this view is in direct conflicts with the view of Abba, that the prophecies of the prophets, including that of universal peace, will be filled not in the world to come, but in the Messianic period. So I believe this is at the core of the conflict in the world today, this idea of a millennial reign for some believers that is in this world, and for others who don't accept that. And, I'm being kind of biased here. When the Talmudist or the Kabbalist goes through and looks at these prophecies, they're applying to this world. There will be a millennial reign in this world. And I believe, as opposed to a Christian view where all of these Old Testament prophecies were perfectly fulfilled by and large, except for a tiny bit, with the birth and death and resurrection and ascension of Jesus Christ. They were perfectly fulfilled. And so I'm being a little biased here, but you really have to contort yourself to apply this to this world. And it's a very idealistic vision of man and the potential of man. And you'll see that with some of the segments I'm going to look at. But here's just one example of how rabbis have just avoided so many inconveniences in the prophecies. And here's just one example. Isaiah 53, 3 through 5. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. Like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows, yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. Um, they don't they don't like that one. That's very inconvenient. But really, all of the prophets from the earliest that essentially said that you will become divorced from God, the Israel of the north, the 10 tribes, and you'll be scattered among the nations of the world because of your transgressions. And then he focused, the prophets focused on the southern kingdoms, and always saying that essentially you're in big trouble. So God created a new covenant, and a covenant in which anybody can enter, Jew or Gentile. So this is going to be the hardest part for me to speak about today. Here's where I'm going. I think, in my mind, the great falling away that the Bible speaks about, I believe it's Christian Zionism, which in short is a merger with this synagogue, and the idea that there'll be a literal 1,000-year reign on this earth. So in short, this idea came about in the middle of the 20th century and has come to dominate Christian thinking. It has its roots. I don't want to go deeply into this with Darby and Schofield and the powers that be, the usual suspects, sort of just kind of really took over the seminaries, the book market, all of the television platforms, and it just dominates the YouTube truth community. Unfortunately, there's so few voices that are going to really look. There are some, but they're so few. And essentially, and I know this is tough to kind of say or hear, to a large extent, I believe that the people that are perceiving this, oftentimes I think it's a different spirit that they're listening to, and it goes counter to not only 2,000 years of Christian understanding of these texts, but it is really in cahoots with the synagogue of Satan. And so it's scary stuff to talk about. But Christ, in short, said, "My kingdom is not of this world." And we think about that millennial kingdom, whether you're looking at consistently throughout the Gospels, throughout Paul's writing, we have this age and the age to come, this age and the age to come, this premillennial dispensational rapture doctrine, this kind of Hollywood left behind stuff, really contorts the scriptures in a way that's pretty mind-bending, and it's really only through repetition and trust of human beings that people have internalized this doctrine. So I know our discussion is supposed to be about politics and not millennial reigns, but it's just hard to understand the powers that be and the direction of human history without kind of getting a little bit of a grasp on this. And I know people for an agnostic or atheistic or naturalistic mind bent, they can't imagine that there would be somebody setting up a theistic order because it appears exoterically that powers that be are all atheists and money grabbers and so forth. So when I'm about to read these texts, or when I read these texts, say to yourself, whatever your kind of worldview or your religious bent, that if you apply these things to sort of a heavenly kingdom, it makes a little more sense, this kind of peace and perfection, than to actually think human beings could somehow achieve these things. But again, I don't want to cloud this too much. I want to give it a fair, I want to give it a somewhat fair reading. So let's continue with Higger. On page 48, when the Messiah arrives, say the rabbis, his message will be of universal peace. And Christ always said that. He will come as the bringer of peace. I come with a sword. I come to separate. I come to separate families, communities. I come to separate because that's what truth does. The first is the so-called biological necessities for war. So here's where we're kind of getting into this. And this is really more about political theory. And for anybody that's had to go through classes in this, some of this language, has been shoved down your throat. So you might recognize where some of these ideas are coming from. So it's about the necessity for war. We live in this war-torn world. And it's the animal instinct in man to fight and devour the weaker creatures. The rabbi, like the prophets, express their opinion, therefore, that in the age to come, a radical change in the instincts of the animal world would take place. Animals being ever on the same path of evolution as man is. Through most species of them, I guess I got the page in there, it's creeped in there, are far behind most of mankind. So even though this is an exoteric reading, and he's supposed to be kind of assuming here that there is an Elohim, creator of the world, he's slipping. He's kind of in between two worlds here because he's conceding where I'm an evolutionist, and I have a different kind of view of creation, and that in my view, man will, in an almost way, he can be almost transmuted into a different kind of being altogether. So that's what we just read, in my estimation. So the natural instinct to fight in order to conquer and to destroy is a disease, which is a remnant of the defects in the nature of the past era. In the course of ages, the beasts will be cured of that disease or weakness. Consequently, man too will learn to live in peace. Let's continue on page 50. For love, brotherhood, and genuine friendship will exist only when there are abundance and plenty, so that those who are fortunate to possess them will see to it that they are distributed equally among all people. So here's where we get into kind of political theory and political talk. So those who are fortunate to possess them, I go ahead and guess. Are these the masters of high finance, masters of telecommunications and media? Are they the Kabbalistic rabbis who are deciding, in a sense, who gets what, and as we'll see, who gets to decide who lives and who dies? And of course, these ideas that we just mentioned and that we're about to continue with sound a lot like Karl Marx and Marxism. And my belief is that he's presented to us as an atheist. I believe he's a Kabbalist, Karl Marx, and is spreading this vision of the world of a Kabbalistic future. But the Jewish, from page 53, but the Jewish spiritual leaders always hoped and looked forward to the ideal time when conditions would radically be changed so that the scourge of poverty would be abolished. And of course, that's how communism has always been told or sold to us as, as it's for the people, and brotherhood and fraternity and love and kumbaya. And of course, for us more cynically minded people, we see it's sort of a banker's scheme to suck up all the resources of the world under the name of communism. Continuing on page 53, indeed, the principles of righteousness and justice upon which the new social order in the ideal era will be rebuilt will demand an equal footing economically for the poor. The satisfaction of the demand will mark the beginning of the function of the kingdom of God, the righteous judge on earth. So it's still slightly vague. Is it God coming down and figuring out who gets what? Or I think the spiritual leaders right there is probably a little bit of a tip off who gets to make these decisions. And, after all, it's going to be, according to them, a theocratic world. So I guess the masters of those texts will probably be making these decisions about who gets what. Moreover, the abolition of poverty will hasten to solve the problems of crime, the curse of modern social life. For there will be no temptation to rob or to murder. Every individual will be assured a comfortable home, food, and clothing. Woo woo! What could go wrong? What could go wrong? Let me take a minute. I'm old enough, so I had this opportunity when I was studying abroad. I did a year of medieval and Renaissance studies at Oxford, and it was very difficult at that time during the communist era to get over to the Soviet Union. And I sort of finagled this. I didn't have much money, but I kind of finagled it, and I was able to spend a few weeks in St. Petersburg. I think it was still called Leningrad then, and Moscow. And just quickly, somebody that, because I'm old enough right now, and I don't think many people actually saw it firsthand from the lens of an American capitalist. I said capitalist, not capitalist. That some of the pictures, it's still, especially the trains that would come on the street and the faces, and looking at those faces and just the life had been sucked out of these people, and just the embarrassing kind of just clothes that they had to wear and so forth. And this is sort of right before, it was during Perestroika. Nobody suspected a year later that in a heartbeat it would seemingly switch. The regime would seemingly topple. So I was kind of at the end of that regime. So this is a little bit of speculation on my part. Eustace Mullins, the New World Order researcher from way back when, once stated, once the parasitic class has sucked the life out of something, just like in the biological kingdom, it sort of needs to move on or kind of let a little bit of life back into that system. And I sort of suspect that's why the sort of full-on communist model never really would work, or was probably even designed to work. And we know the same players were really in charge of fascism and communism all along. So I suspect this synthesis was sort of intended all along. So let's continue here on page 56. In the course of time, when the new social order starts functioning, every member of the new state will work a minimum number of hours a day. Oh, Karl Marx was always loved that. You're going to be able to hunt and fish and do a little of this and a little of that. It's just, every member of the new state will work a minimum number of hours a day in accordance with the particular demands of the social life of the universal state. So in the new imperium, this is a world order. There you go. Nobody's going to have to work too hard. There will be but few idlers. And forget, what if I want to work hard? What if I want to work all day long? When I used to have this stuff in graduate school, it's just like, whatever. Isn't that my choice? Okay, sorry. There will be but few idlers. Okay. And Marx always referred to those as the dregs. So he wasn't into idlers either, because you do want to work for the state. They want you working. Most of the workers will not feel the bondage of their caste. There will always be steady employment, since production and distribution will be scientifically and universally regulated to meet the goods of a population. So he's talking about the birth of a technocracy here. I didn't know if I was going to mention this or not. I've always had a few ideas on this, and I liked the writings of the Collins brothers. It's been a while. The Ascension of the Scientific Dictatorship. But I've always kind of questioned when it's like, oh, it's not us doing it, it's the robot managing you. I've always wondered if there's kind of somebody behind the curtain running the robot, and that's why when I hear about the next era to come and artificial intelligence and so forth, I'm highly skeptical. Simply because one of my thoughts is that human consciousness is the image of God, and I don't believe it can be transferred to machines, and I don't believe by a long shot a machine will ever have consciousness. So, continuing again here, there will always be steady employment since production and distribution will be scientifically and universally regulated to meet the needs of a population which never indulges in war or greedy economic striving. So, like when we think about, how did the modern state of Israel come into being? Um, and this is what I ask. Um, you know, that God just suddenly just made it happen, or the players that did. I mean, the death count, what had to be done, and I guess for those people that felt that this was their job to build this thing, I guess their attitude is you have to scramble a few eggs to make an omelet. So it's all. And I think, part of why I'm doing this, I think some good intentioned Christians, um, if they just saw this piece of the New World Order, they would just kind of get out of that mindset that this is God's plan. I'm not saying that God doesn't allow things to happen in this. Okay. Production will be organized internationally, not nationally. Raw materials, likewise, will be controlled by a central authority so that the present waste will disappear. So it is a central authority that's making decisions here. Here's something interesting. Gold will be of secondary importance in the new social and economic order. Eventually, all the friction, jealousy, quarrels, and misunderstandings that exist under the present system will not be known in the ideal Messianic era. So, I mean, if you're hearing me right now, does anybody believe any of this stuff, that human beings are going to fundamentally be not changed? You'd have to be transmuted into something new. And again, if you have this idea of this era and the next to come, which is heaven, and maybe if you're not a believer, it sounds a little crazy that you'll be given a new body and a new life, and that there will be no more sickness. But they're talking about this in this world. And so, interestingly enough, Jerusalem's gonna house all the. Here we go. The city of Jerusalem will possess most of the gold and precious stones of the world. So who knows where it's been? We've been told that Fort Knox doesn't have gold anymore. We've never been told where it goes. But who knows? There you go. So the gold of the world will be stored there in Jerusalem, according to this plan. Because of bad economic distribution and organization, money is more easily obtained by wicked people than by righteous ones. I agree. The second reason is that the people will be trained and educated to differentiate between real spiritual values and material value. So before I conclude, I think it is so hard for agnostics and Christians and Jewish people to kind of see that at the core of this new world order is there's this Kabbalistic agenda. And so I include in kind of the completion of my work some of the ideas from Diane Loper's current work, Kabbalah Secrets That Christians Should Know. And when you think of the Tree of Life, the Sephirot, and the sort of the critical rabbis over the past that have been able to kind of go into the gateways, the portals, the crowns, what they're essentially doing. And again, I think if Christians could really just would be brave enough to kind of read this and brave enough to look at how modern Israel was actually constructed, they would need to kind of really rethink, just read the New Testament with new eyes. But these rabbis, they through contemplation, and this is what's being exposed now to the masses to learn these techniques of contemplation. You relate get involved with, familiar spirits, I think we would call them, or unclean spirits. And they can kind of do all your teaching, set up whole academies for you in this netherland. And you come back and it's an inversion of the Old Testament prophets. You demonstrate that you've kind of taken this tree, you've really worked the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and that there's a body of understanding that you've truly through contemplation integrated yourself with those spirits and come back, and it does lay the agenda for these spirits on the earth. Okay, to finish off this chapter from page 60. In any event, in the future ideal era on the earth, the happiness of man will be complete and perfect. A number of reasons will account for that new state of man's happiness. The material needs and necessities of the individual will be readily obtained in abundance. Children and young people will be immune from death. Bodily imperfections and physical defects will be unknown. Lastly, there will be an important cause for everlasting happiness of the people. Since the Lord will dwell in Zion, the ideal land of Israel, the ideal righteous people, who, in the words of Zephaniah, shall not fear evil anymore. And so, how is this going to happen? Do they believe God's going to free them of death and sickness? Well, I would guess that's where all the research into molecular science throughout the 20th century was really aimed at. Curing man of death, transhumanism, the whole ball of wax, I believe, is, it's began in the garden with the Gnostic idea that through our human innovation, we can A, become our own gods, but B, conquer death and live forever in these kind of perfect deaths. So there are a lot of people are starting to believe this, that we will be able to, through science, live forever in an ideal state in this world. And I'll finish this today with obviously the idea I've been probing all along. I think that it's important, and I'll speak more to people that call themselves Christians right now, to get straight with this. Is your consciousness pointing toward the reign of Christ in this world or only in the next? Because I think it's very critical. And the Bible couldn't be more clear. We have this age, the age that at the end of time, Christ will judge the wheat and the tares, the goat and the sheep at the end of time. So thank y'all for joining Dr. Deep State, and have a great week, everybody.